The rain drummed against the funeral home windows as I watched my grandmother's mahogany casket being carried to the hearse. Eleanor Margaret Thompson had been 93 when she passed, a woman who'd weathered the Great Depression, World War II, and decades of raising 5 children on a farm in rural Kentucky. She'd been my anchor, my confidant, and the only person in my family who truly understood me. My name is Sarah Thompson Martinez, and at 34, I was the only granddaughter among 7 grandchildren. While my male cousins had scattered across the country pursuing careers in finance and law, I'd stayed close to Grandma Ellie. I was the one who drove her to doctor appointments, helped her tend her prized rose garden, and listened to her stories about the old days. When she moved into assisted living 3 years ago, I visited every Sunday without fail, bringing homemade cookies and fresh flowers from her beloved garden that I'd maintained at her old house. My brother Marcus stood beside me at the graveside. According to YouTube analytics, 99% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. His expensive black suit immaculate despite the drizzle. At 38, he was everything my father had wanted in a son: successful, ruthless, and utterly focused on climbing the corporate ladder. He worked as a hedge fund manager in New York and visited Kentucky maybe twice a year, usually around holidays when appearances mattered. Dad stood at the head of the grave, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. At 71, Robert Thompson still carried himself with the stern authority of the high school principal he'd been for 35 years. He'd always favored Marcus, something that had become increasingly obvious as we grew older. Where I was creative and empathetic, Marcus was calculating and ambitious. Qualities Dad admired and rewarded. "She's in a better place now," Dad said quietly as we walked back to the cars. "At least her suffering is over." I nodded, though my throat was too tight to speak. Grandma Ellie hadn't been suffering. She'd been vibrant until the very end, telling jokes and beating the nurses at poker. She died peacefully in her sleep, which she'd always said was how she wanted to go. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following week at Dad's house, the same farmhouse where I'd grown up, and where Grandma Ellie had lived for the last 20 years of her life after Grandpa passed. Dad had inherited the property when he was the only child willing to stay in Kentucky and care for his aging parents. I spent that week in a haze of grief, mechanically going through my routine as a third-grade teacher at Millfield Elementary. My students, bless their hearts, seemed to sense my sadness and were unusually gentle, bringing me drawings of flowers and whispering condolences with the earnest sweetness that only 8-year-olds possess. My husband, Carlos, held me when I cried, his strong carpenter's hands stroking my hair as I sobbed into his shoulder. We'd been married for 6 years, and he'd loved Grandma Ellie like his own grandmother. She'd been the one to teach him her secret cornbread recipe, claiming he had better instincts in the kitchen than any Thompson man. "She knew how much you loved her, mi amor," he whispered. "That's what matters." But I couldn't shake the feeling that there were things left unsaid, loose ends that would never be tied up now that she was gone. Grandma Ellie had been sharp as a tack until the end, and lately she'd been dropping hints about making sure things were fair and righting old wrongs. I'd assumed she was talking about family squabbles or neighborhood gossip, but now I wondered if there was something more. The Tuesday of the will reading dawned clear and cold. I arrived at Dad's house to find Marcus already there, looking confident and relaxed as he chatted with Dad about his latest business deals. They barely acknowledged me as I hung my coat in the hall closet, the same closet where Grandma Ellie used to keep butterscotch candies in her coat pockets for visiting grandchildren. Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer, arrived promptly at 2 o'clock. He was a thin, nervous man in his 60s who'd handled legal matters for our family for decades. He set his briefcase on the kitchen table and pulled out a manila folder with hands that shook slightly. "Well," he began, clearing his throat, "Eleanor's will is quite straightforward. She was very clear about her wishes." My heart hammered as he opened the document. Grandma Ellie hadn't been wealthy by most standards, but she'd been frugal her entire life and had saved carefully. She owned stock in several companies, had bonds and savings accounts, and most importantly, she owned a small property in town that she'd inherited from her own mother, a charming Victorian house that was currently rented out to a young family. "The bulk of Eleanor's estate," Mr. Henderson continued, including her savings, investments, and the rental property on Maple Street. She has left to her son Robert Thompson to be distributed at his discretion to his children. I felt a small flutter of hope. At his discretion meant Dad would divide things fairly between Marcus and me, right? After all, I was the one who'd been there, who'd cared for her, who'd preserved her memory and her stories. Dad cleared his throat. Well, that's simple enough. Marcus, as my eldest son and the most financially savvy, you'll be receiving Grandma's inheritance. You'll know how to invest it properly and make it grow. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at Dad, certain I'd misheard. What about me? Sarah, you're married now. Carlos provides for you. Marcus is building his future, starting his own family. This money will do more good helping him establish himself. But Dad, I took care of her. I was there every week. I maintained her garden. And that was your choice. Marcus interrupted smoothly. No one asked you to do those things. You did them because you wanted to, not because anyone expected payment for it. My face flushed hot with anger and humiliation. Payment? You think I spent time with Grandma for payment? I loved her. Of course you did, Dad said dismissively. And she loved you too. But love doesn't pay bills or secure futures. Marcus has always been more responsible with money. I looked between them, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time how they viewed me. I wasn't the devoted granddaughter who'd sacrifice time and energy to care for an elderly woman. I was just the sentimental daughter who couldn't be trusted with serious matters like money. How much? I asked quietly. Mr. Henderson shuffled uncomfortably through his papers. The total estate after taxes and final expenses comes to approximately $350,000. $350,000. My teacher's salary was barely $40,000 a year. That money could have paid off our modest house, helped Carlos expand his contracting business, maybe even allowed us to start the family we'd been putting off for financial reasons. But Marcus would receive it all. Marcus, who made more in bonuses than I made in 3 years, who'd bought a Manhattan condo worth more than I'd earn in a lifetime, who'd been too busy to visit his dying grandmother more than a handful of times. I need some air, I managed, pushing back from the table. Sarah, don't be dramatic, Dad called after me, but I was already walking toward the back door. I found myself in Grandma Ellie's garden, now brown and dormant in the November cold. I'd spent countless hours here with her, learning to prune roses, plant bulbs, and coax vegetables from the Kentucky soil. She taught me that gardens required patience, that some of the most beautiful flowers bloomed after the harshest winters. The truth has a way of coming out, sweetheart, she told me last spring as we planted her prized heirloom tomatoes. Good things come to those who wait, but justice comes to those who deserve it. I thought she was talking about the neighbor's dog that kept digging up her flower beds, but now I wondered if she'd meant something deeper. When I went back inside, Marcus was already gone, off to catch his flight back to New York with his newfound fortune. Dad was washing coffee cups at the sink, humming tunelessly as if nothing had happened. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. Did it ever occur to you that maybe Grandma would have wanted me to have something? Some small token, some acknowledgement of the relationship we had? He turned off the water and dried his hands slowly. Sarah, your grandmother left her estate to me to distribute as I saw fit. She trusted my judgment. And my judgment is that Marcus needs this money more than you do. How can you possibly think that? Marcus makes more money than... Marcus is thinking about his future. He's talking about starting a family, buying a bigger place. You and Carlos are settled. You have your little house, your teaching job. You don't need more. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. My little house, my teaching job. As if the work I did educating children was somehow less valuable than Marcus's manipulation of financial markets. I drove home in silence, my heart heavy with more than grief. I felt betrayed, not just by the inheritance decision, but by the realization of how my own father saw me. In his eyes, I was the dutiful daughter who should be content with whatever scraps fell from the table. Carlos was waiting when I got home, his kind eyes immediately reading my distress. I collapsed into his arms and told him everything, the words pouring out between sobs. Ay, mi amor, he murmured, holding me tight. I'm so sorry, but you know what? We don't need their money. We have each other, we have our home, we have good work. Money doesn't make a person rich in the ways that matter. He was right, of course. We were happy, we were healthy, we had meaningful work and a solid marriage. But the injustice of it burned in my chest like acid. It wasn't about the money, it was about being seen, being valued, being recognized for the love and care I'd given freely. The weeks that followed were difficult. I threw myself into work, channeling my emotions into my classroom, where 23 third graders needed my attention and energy. Teaching had always been my calling, something Dad never seemed to understand. He saw it as a safe, unambitious choice, but I knew better. Every day I had the chance to shape young minds, to be the adult who believed in a struggling child, to plant seeds of knowledge and confidence that would grow for a lifetime. Marcus called once, ostensibly to check on me, but really to brag about his plans for the inheritance money. He was investing most of it, naturally, but was also putting a down payment on a summer house in the Hamptons. "You understand why Dad made this decision, right?" he said with false concern. "I mean, you've always been more of a people person. Numbers and investments aren't really your thing." I bit back the response I wanted to give, that I managed our household budget perfectly well, that I'd helped several teacher friends navigate their retirement planning, that being good with people didn't make me financially incompetent. Instead, I simply said, "I hope you're happy with it, Marcus." "I think Grandma would be proud to see her money being used wisely," he added, and that stung more than everything else combined. Autumn turned to winter, and I tried to make peace with the situation. I visited Grandma Ellie's grave every few weeks, bringing fresh flowers and telling her about my students, about Carlos's growing business, about the small joys that filled our days. I like to think she would have been proud of how I handled my disappointment, with grace rather than bitterness, with dignity rather than drama. It was a cold February morning when everything changed. I was at school working with a group of struggling readers when the office secretary appeared in my doorway. "Sarah, there's a man here to see you. Says it's about your grandmother." My heart skipped. Had something happened to her grave? Was there some problem with the funeral arrangements? The man waiting in the office was elderly, probably in his 70s, with silver hair and the ramrod straight posture of a military man. He wore a neat flannel shirt and well-pressed khakis, and his weathered hands held a manila envelope. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Frank Davidson. I served with your grandfather in Korea." "Oh." I'd heard stories about Grandpa's army buddies, though most had passed away over the years. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Davidson. Please call me Frank. I'm sorry to bother you at work, but I've been trying to track down Eleanor's family since I heard about her passing. I have something that belongs to you." He held out the envelope with the gravity of a man delivering state secrets. "Your grandmother asked me to hold on to this and make sure it got to the right person if anything happened to her. She was very specific about who should receive it." My hands shook as I took the envelope. It was sealed with my name written across the front in Grandma Ellie's distinctive handwriting for Sarah Thompson Martinez, my dear granddaughter. "She gave this to me about 6 months ago," Frank continued. "Said she had some concerns about her estate and wanted to make sure certain things were handled properly. She trusted me to make sure this reached you personally." I stared at the envelope, afraid to open it. "What is it?" Frank's weathered face creased into a small smile. "Why don't you open it and see?" With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. Inside was a thick document, official-looking and notarized. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Last Will and Testament of Eleanor Margaret Thompson, revised." My breath caught in my throat. I scanned the first page quickly, then more slowly, hardly believing what I was reading. This will was dated just 8 months before Grandma Ellie's death, 6 months more recent than the will that had been read at Dad's house, and it was completely different. In this document, Grandma Ellie left her son Robert the farmhouse and $20,000 for his years of care and support. But the rest of her estate, the savings, the investments, the rental property, everything else, was left directly to me. "I leave the bulk of my estate to my beloved granddaughter, Sarah Thompson Martinez," the will read, "who has shown me love and devotion beyond measure. She has been my companion in my golden years, the keeper of my stories, and the gardener of my dreams. She alone among my grandchildren has understood that wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the moments we share and the love we give freely. I trust her to use this inheritance wisely, and with the same generous heart she has always shown me." I read the passage 3 times before the words truly sank in. Frank was watching me carefully, and I realized tears were streaming down my face. She knew, I whispered. She knew what would happen. Frank nodded gravely. Eleanor was nobody's fool. She suspected your father might not honor her true wishes, so she took steps to ensure justice was done. She had me witness this will, along with Father Murphy from St. Mark's. It's completely legal and properly notarized. But why didn't she just give this to the lawyer directly? She tried, Frank said, his mouth tightening. But Henderson told her the other will was fine, that there was no need to update it. She got the feeling he wasn't taking her seriously, figured an old lady was just being sentimental. So she came to me instead, said she'd served her country in her own way during the war, working in the munitions factory, and she deserved the same respect as any veteran when it came to her final wishes. My mind was reeling. This changed everything, but it also meant confronting my father and Marcus, challenging the distribution that had already taken place. Frank, what do I do with this? You take it to a lawyer, a different lawyer, and you file it with the probate court. This is the valid will, Sarah. The other one was superseded the moment Eleanor signed this one. But Marcus has already started spending the money. He bought a house. That's his problem to sort out, Frank said firmly. Your grandmother's wishes were clear. She wanted you to have what she left you, and she took legal steps to ensure that happened. I stared at the document in my hands, overwhelmed by a mixture of vindication and dread. Part of me wanted to march straight to Dad's house and confront him with the truth. Another part wanted to hide the will away and pretend I'd never seen it, to avoid the family explosion that would inevitably follow. She also left you this, Frank said, pulling a smaller envelope from his jacket pocket. This one was unsealed, and inside was a letter in Grandma Ellie's handwriting, "My dearest Sarah. If you're reading this, then Frank has done his job and found you. I hope you're not too shocked by the contents of my real will. I want you to know that I made this decision with a clear mind and a full heart. Over the years, I've watched how your father favors Marcus, and I've seen how that favoritism has blinded him to your many gifts. You have a generous spirit, my dear granddaughter, and a capacity for love that reminds me of my own mother. You stayed with me not out of duty, but out of genuine affection, and that means more to me than I can express. I know your father will be angry when this comes to light. He may say hurtful things, and Marcus will certainly be upset about having to return money he considers his. But I want you to remember that this inheritance isn't about money, it's about recognition. It's about acknowledging the depth of your care and the value of your presence in my life. Use this gift wisely. Help Carlos grow his business if that would make you both happy. Start the family you've been dreaming of. Travel to see the world beyond Kentucky. Whatever you choose, do it with joy and without guilt. Most importantly, remember that justice isn't always swift, but it is eventual. Good things come to those who wait, but they come because those people deserve them. All my love, Grandma Ellie P.S. Don't let them convince you that this is somehow wrong or unfair. I was of sound mind when I made these decisions, and Frank and Father Murphy will testify to that if necessary. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling Grandma Ellie's love and vindication washing over me. She had seen the injustice that was coming and had taken steps to prevent it. She had fought for me even from beyond the grave. Frank was patient while I composed myself, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. This was a mission he'd been entrusted with, and he was seeing it through to completion. What happens next? I asked. You take this to a probate attorney. I can recommend one if you'd like. They'll file the new will with the court and begin the process of correcting the distribution. Marcus will have to return the money he received, minus what he's legally entitled to under the original will, which was nothing. And my father? Frank's expression grew more serious. Your father was named executor of what he thought was Eleanor's final will. If he distributed the estate in good faith based on the document he had, he won't be in legal trouble. But if he knew about this will and chose to ignore it, he shrugged meaningfully. I thought about Dad's behavior, his dismissive attitude toward my relationship with Grandma Ellie, his assumption that Marcus deserved everything. Had he known about the revised will? Had he deliberately chosen to ignore it? I need to think about this, I said finally. Of course, but don't think too long. There are time limits on these things, and the longer Marcus has that money, the more complicated recovery becomes. I drove home in a daze, the will and letter tucked safely in my purse. Carlos was in the garage, working on cabinets for a client's kitchen, the rhythmic sound of his sanding soothing in its normalcy. Mi amor, you're home early. Is everything okay? I showed him the documents, watching his dark eyes grow wide as he read. By the time he finished, he was shaking his head in amazement. Dios mío, your abuela. She was one smart lady. But Carlos, what do I do? This will tear the family apart. He set down his sandpaper and took my hands in his calloused ones. Sarah, your family was already torn apart. Your father and brother, they showed you who they really are. This will doesn't change their hearts. It just reveals what was already there. But $300,000! Marcus bought that house, and now he'll have to sell it or find another way to pay for it. That's not your problem, mi amor. Your grandmother wanted you to have this money. She made a legal document to ensure you got it. To ignore that would be to dishonor her memory. He was right, of course. Grandma Ellie had gone to significant trouble to ensure her true wishes were carried out. To hide the will would be to invalidate her final act of love and recognition. I called the attorney Frank had recommended, a sharp woman named Patricia Hendricks, who specialized in estate disputes. She reviewed the documents and confirmed what Frank had told me. The revised will was valid and superseded the earlier version. This is actually more common than you might think, she said during our meeting. Elderly people sometimes realize their families might not carry out their wishes, so they take extra precautions. Your grandmother was very thorough. This will is ironclad. How long will the process take? A few weeks to get it filed and reviewed by the court. Once it's validated, your brother will be legally required to return the money. If he refuses, we can pursue collection through the courts. But most people comply rather than face the additional legal fees and publicity. I took a deep breath. Let's do it. The legal filing made local news within days. In a small town like ours, estate disputes were rare and juicy gossip. The headline read, "Local teacher challenges brother's inheritance with second will." And while the article was factually accurate, it made me sound grasping and vindictive. Dad called that evening, his voice tight with anger. Sarah, what the hell do you think you're doing? I'm honoring Grandma's actual wishes, Dad. She left a more recent will that's ridiculous. If there was another will, why didn't Henderson know about it? Because she tried to give it to him, and he dismissed her concerns. So she made other arrangements. There was a long pause. Sarah, this is going to destroy our family. No, Dad. This is going to reveal our family. There's a difference. Marcus called the next day, and he was livid. Do you have any idea what you've done? I've already put money down on the house. I've made investments based on that inheritance. You can't just swoop in with some mysterious document, and it's not mysterious, Marcus. It's legal. It's notarized. It's witnessed. And it's 8 months more recent than the will you inherited under. This is insane. Grandma was old. She was probably confused. She was sharp as a tack until the day she died, and you know it. She made this will because she knew exactly what would happen with the first one. You're being selfish. That money could have set me up for life. You're already set up for life, I said quietly. You make more money than most people see in a decade. I'm a teacher married to a carpenter. She knew who needed help and who deserved recognition. The conversation devolved from there, with Marcus threatening to fight the will and accusing me of manipulating a vulnerable old woman. I hung up feeling drained but resolute. The court validated the will within 3 weeks. Patricia called with the news on a Thursday morning, her voice pleased and professional. It's official, Sarah. The court has recognized your grandmother's revised will as valid. Marcus has 30 days to return the funds he received. I felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. The legal victory was satisfying, but I knew the personal costs were just beginning. Marcus hired his own attorney and initially threatened to contest the will on grounds of diminished capacity, but Father Murphy and Frank Davidson both testified to Grandma Ellie's mental sharpness when she signed the document. Frank brought photos from their conversation, showing her laughing and animated as she discussed her plans for the will. Father Murphy testified that she'd been completely lucid during their discussions about the document, that she'd explained her reasoning clearly and without confusion. Faced with overwhelming evidence of the will's validity and his grandmother's sound mind, Marcus finally capitulated. But the money he returned came with strings attached. He'd already spent nearly $50,000 on the house down payment and initial investments. He had to liquidate some of his own assets to make up the difference, and his resentment was palpable. Dad barely spoke to me throughout the process. When the money was finally transferred to my account, he called one last time. "I hope you're happy, Sarah. You've gotten your money, but you've lost your family." "Dad, I never wanted to lose my family. I just wanted my family to see me." "Well, congratulations. Marcus is talking about never coming back to Kentucky. Are you satisfied?" The line went dead, and I realized that in gaining Grandma Ellie's inheritance, I had indeed lost the family I'd grown up with. But perhaps that family had been more illusion than reality anyway. Carlos and I used the money exactly as Grandma Ellie had hoped we would. We paid off our house, eliminating the financial stress that had kept us from starting a family. Carlos was able to expand his contracting business, hiring 2 employees and taking on larger projects. We set aside money for the children we hoped to have, and even took the trip to Spain we dreamed about for years. But more than the financial freedom, the inheritance gave me something I'd never fully had before: validation. Grandma Ellie had seen my worth when my own father couldn't. She had recognized the value of presence over profit, of love over ambition. 6 months after the will was settled, I received an unexpected visitor at school. Marcus stood in the office doorway, looking older and less confident than I remembered. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. We walked to my empty classroom, and for a moment we were just siblings again, surrounded by the cheerful chaos of children's artwork and learning posters. "I came to apologize," he said without preamble. "Not about the money. I still think Grandma made the wrong choice. But about everything else. The way I talked to you, the way I dismissed what you meant to her." I studied his face, looking for signs of sincerity. "What changed your mind?" He laughed bitterly. "My girlfriend left me. Said she realized I was the kind of person who would take money that should have gone to someone else and justify it by saying I deserved it more. She said it showed her who I really was." "I'm sorry, Marcus." "Are you? Really?" I considered the question honestly. "Yes. I never wanted you to be unhappy. I just wanted to be treated fairly." He nodded slowly. "Dad's been difficult since all this happened. He keeps saying you destroyed the family, but I think maybe the family was already broken, and we just didn't want to admit it. Maybe. For what it's worth, I think Grandma was right about you. You were always the better person, Sarah. I was just too proud to admit it." We didn't hug or make grand reconciliations. Marcus left that day, and while our relationship remained strained, the bitter edge of anger had softened into something more manageable. Dad and I never fully repaired our relationship. He remained convinced that I had acted selfishly, that I had put money above family loyalty. But gradually, over months and years, he began to acknowledge that perhaps he had misjudged the situation. He never apologized directly, but he started asking about my students, complimenting Carlos's work, and occasionally mentioning how proud Grandma Ellie would have been of the choices I'd made. The inheritance allowed Carlos and me to start the family we'd longed for. Our daughter Elena was born 2 years after the will was settled, a perfect combination of her father's gentle nature and her mother's stubborn determination. Our son David followed 3 years later, and both children grew up hearing stories about their great-grandmother Ellie, the woman who had fought for justice even from beyond the grave. I still teach third grade, though the financial security from Grandma Ellie's gift allowed me to be more selective about opportunities, to pursue additional training, to focus on the aspects of education I'm most passionate about. I started a program for struggling readers, funded partly by the inheritance, that has helped dozens of children discover the joy of books and learning. Every year on the anniversary of Grandma Ellie's death, I visit her grave with fresh flowers from the garden I still maintain at Dad's house. I tell her about Elena and David, about Carlos's thriving business, about the children I'm teaching, and the difference we're making together. "You were right," I whisper to her headstone every time. "Justice did come, and good things came to someone who waited." The irony isn't lost on me that in trying to keep me from an inheritance I supposedly didn't deserve, Dad and Marcus actually ensured that I received exactly what Grandma Ellie had intended for me all along. Their actions revealed their true characters, just as my response revealed mine. Karma, it turns out, doesn't require revenge or retaliation. It simply requires truth and time. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd accepted the original distribution quietly, if I'd swallowed my hurt and maintained the family peace. But then I think about Grandma Ellie, taking the time and effort to ensure her true wishes were carried out, trusting Frank Davidson to deliver justice when the official channels failed her. She had faith that truth would eventually triumph over favoritism, that love would be recognized and rewarded. She was right, as she usually was. The inheritance was never really about money. It was about being seen, being valued, and being vindicated. And in that sense, it was worth every moment of family discord and personal struggle. In the end, karma didn't strike like lightning or arrive with dramatic fanfare. It came quietly, in the form of an elderly veteran carrying an envelope, delivering justice with the same steadfast determination that had characterized my grandmother's entire life. Sometimes the most profound victories are the quietest ones, and sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money at all. It's the knowledge that someone saw your worth and fought to ensure it was recognized. As I write this story, Elena is 7 and David is 4, both of them learning to tend the garden that connects us to their great-grandmother's memory. They'll grow up knowing that they descend from a woman who believed in justice, who fought for the people she loved, and who understood that the most valuable inheritance isn't what we receive, but what we pass on to those who come after us. That's the real legacy Grandma Ellie left me. Not the money that secured our future, but the example of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it costs something precious. That's a lesson worth more than any inheritance, and it's one I'll carry with me always.